wherever you are watching us from in the world, great to see you. It seems like yesterday, but it was actually last September that we wrapped up the SCDM 2021 conference. And of course, it was the first global conference. And we think this webinar is also going to be global. We've had people registering, obviously from North America, from Europe, but from India and from China. So it's great to see you all. The next hour is really a chance to catch up on some of the key highlights from that conference if you weren't able to attend. So we're going to be looking at the biggest trends in the industry. We're going to look at the achievements. We're going to look at priorities for the future. And of course, all this has been played out in the shadow of the pandemic. And so we will also be looking at the critical role of clinical data management in developing those vaccines so very, very quickly. We had a session on that at the conference. We'll talk some more about that today. So to help us to look back at the key aspects of the discussions, I want to introduce our panel to you. So we have Carol Schaefer, who is Director and Program Lead for Data Monitoring and Management at Pfizer. Good to see you, Carol. Sanjay Bawaj, who is Head of Data Science, Clinical Technology Strategy and Operations at AbbVie. Good to see you. Jonathan Andrews, Chief Strategy Officer at Clinical Inc., and Ward Lemaire, Head of Data Management at Janssen J&J. Great to see you all. Just before we talk, I want to say that to everybody watching, we do want to hear from you as well. So please be sending questions throughout, and we will have a Q&A at the end of this hour. So you'll see the panel in your Slido screen. You just put your questions there. If possible, if you can say who you would like to direct your question to, that would also help. And we hope to get to some of those questions a bit later on. So Carol, first of all, I'm going to come to you because you were co-chair, one of the co-chairs for the third time of the SCDM program. So at the heart of putting together the whole program, and the theme was Future Now. So I know that, well, there was a keynote speaker that started off with a very sort of futuristic outlook, and that really set the scene for the conference. But tell me from your perspective, which sessions really had an impact on you and kind of fed into this idea of Future Now?
Thank you, Kathy. Yes, I mean, Chris's keynote really did set the tone, even though he is an astrophysicist and his very futuristic keynote was maybe initially people thought was way out of grasp for us. He really did frame the entire conference, that whole Future Now version 2021. His exploration of artificial intelligence and the interactions between machine and people really carried through a lot of our tracks, especially the tech, data, and communications track, our decentralized trial track, and certainly our AI ML track. Really, those were complemented by, we had an academic track, we had a post-COVID track, and RBQM at scale track. So his keynote really impacted all of those tracks. I think the tech, data, and communications, especially, that was actually our most popular track. And it really had a lot of the future advances and innovations that we were hearing about throughout the conference.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to see the parallels that between the world of astrophysics and your world, because, I mean, he was just talking about these sort of gigantic amounts of data and
yes,
need to be able to work with them.
Right. Yeah, there was so much in terms of just even beyond terabytes of data. And we're starting, we're seeing that now more than ever, especially during the pandemic and the clinical trials that we're running now with the tens of thousands of patients and millions of data points that we're generating. It really does, the parallels, it's not as far apart as anybody would have initially thought. It's very, very related and relatable.
Well, you've already mentioned this C word, COVID. I mean, and I'd already mentioned it too. I mean, it is just sort of obviously just in everybody's mind, had a huge impact on the way that this conference was organized. And designed, of course. Tell us some more about that, how you had to kind of work around that.
Yeah, we did. It was interesting because when we created the conference last year, the Future Now theme actually created itself. Given the world we currently live in and the pandemic driving a lot of what we were looking to present, so we went from the keynote concepts of the AI, ML, and human interaction, the massive and complex data sets, understanding the past, being able to predict the future, data trending, data predictions. All of this started to come into play as we were seeing the abstracts coming in for the conference. We spoke about the enormous amounts of data. They had to be collected, validated, analyzed, and the skill sets of the CDMs, the clinical data managers, really evolving into a clinical data scientist, which I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit later. All of this really helped frame the conference, and the pandemic really drove a lot of the topics that were discussed, because we all had to shift in how we worked, not just our soft skills, our hard technical skills, all of that had to shift.
Yeah, so, and as you say, quite a lot of those things you mentioned, we'll talk about a little bit more detail and coming up. So thanks, Carol, for now. Obviously, we will come back to you in a moment, okay. But I just want to talk to Sanjay now, because Sanjay Bhargava, you were chair last year. You are no longer. You've probably got a bit more time to yourself now. It must have been a very busy time. So tell us a little bit about your experience of 2021 being chair of SCDM.
Kathy, in one word, I would say it was amazing. I've been a board member for the last some years, and as a member of SCDM for about 15, leading the society, and as a chair, it's been an incredible experience. I personally learned a lot during this process, intricacies of running a nonprofit organization. It was also humbling. I think I mentioned it in my State of the Industry address, that it was pretty humbling taking on the chair role. And one thing I also learned while coming into this was, sometimes people only associate SCDM with our annual conference. You talk to people and say, what is SCDM? Well, that's the annual conference. But which is important. But I think the society does so much more in keeping our data management practitioners updated on new and novel, right, emerging themes. Carol just talked about that were kind of really there for our annual conference, but also something that is more foundational, something that I say, like going back to the basics of data management, such as our good data management practices. So this has been an experience personally for me. I think I would not trade for anything else. This profession has given me so much. So giving back a tiny bit to shaping it for the future felt really fulfilling too. So, and I hope, I'm a past year now, but I hope to be able to continue to support its vision, the SCDM's vision, in whatever capacity the society wants me to.
But I mean, although there were lots of, in many ways, COVID obviously was putting up barriers in some ways, but in some senses, it was a catalyst for this industry, wasn't it? And so just tell us a little bit about how the challenges of COVID-19 affected SCDM over the last couple of years.
Well, a great deal, not just the financial impact that we talked about during the closing of our annual conference, but also it prompted us as a society, as an SCDM, as an organization, to find some of these novel ways of conducting ourselves, to keeping the society, keeping the practitioners engaged in what we were doing. Our virtual conference that we run, our first virtual conference in 2020, and then running a global conference with a scale and size with shattering records of attendance, I think we became stronger as an organization. So COVID-19, I think in some ways, yes, it's been a pandemic. It had huge negative impact on the society. For SCDM too, I think we lost a bunch of our members that succumbed to COVID-19. But as an organization, I think, and doing some of these novel ways of keeping up with that membership, I think we became stronger as an organization, Kathy.
And we will talk about the sort of what stays and what goes once COVID's out of the way, because it has changed the way of working in so many ways. What about then the accomplishments, would you say, of SCDM? I mean, we said we were going to cover that. So what are you most proud of?
Well, quite a number of things. In the past couple of years, if I were to kind of reflect back, a couple of things come to my mind. Launching our JSCDM, our first open access peer-reviewed journal, or reshaping the good data management practices and making them much more current, resurrecting our certification program, and defining a vision and a strategy of how we will go to the next step, which is a certified clinical data scientist certification in the future. But the top of the list for me personally would be our reflection papers, which have really brought the thought leadership front and center for SCDM. I also believe that these papers, again, a huge credit to our innovation committee, really have set the tone and the ground for the vision of SCDM to evolve into, the world of clinical data science in terms of SCDM's focus. So I think if I were to say one thing and only one thing, I would say it will certainly be our reflection papers.
Great. Well, I mean, and you talk about reflecting. I mean, you delivered your State of the Industry address a year ago. I mean, practically to the day. I'm not sure of the actual date because, of course, it's happening next week for 2022. So there, you were speaking about how the whole CDM landscape is evolving and said data managers really need to be prepared for these changes. So a year on, and if you look at the industry, were you right with your crystal ball? And where is the industry now in terms of what you were predicting then?
Well, Kathy, I mean, you're right. It's exactly a year. And I think time does fly by, doesn't it? I think in my view, if I were to reflect on the industry-wide trends, I think the trends that we have noticed and seeing, I think those trends are still holding. COVID-19 had been a watershed moment in terms of adopting new ways of working, even for SCDM, as I just talked about, but adoption of new technology, new ways of conducting clinical trials. But we still have some ways to go, right? We need to continue to overcome some of these broader challenges plaguing us, right? And I talked about recruitment, retention, diversity in participants in our clinical trials. But when we bring it closer to home, closer to data management, I think we are on this journey. I mentioned it last year, a year before. The discussion at the Leadership Forum last year and our keynote that Carol just talked about, I think it also touched on the complexity around trial designs, a regulatory landscape that's kind of evolving and the expectations from the agencies. So all of those trends, I would say, are still holding. The key themes that I think that touched me, I think for our annual conference around digital and hybrid decentralized clinical trials and eSource, I think those trends are intact and I would say are accelerating. The keynote with Chris also, I think if I reflect upon, we talked about AI ML quite a bit, 5 Vs. I know Chris was talking about these more broader topics, but I think being able to engage with him at that keynote and bringing those messages closer to data management. You talk about AI, machine learning, robotics, process automations, intelligent CDMS. You put all of that in the same bucket, and I see companies today across the board recognizing and plowing in that direction. So those trends are holding, and I think we are moving in that direction. Bottom line, Kathy, for me, if I were to just say a couple of things, is the trends for us as a data management people. I think it is absolutely critical for us to recognize those trends, but also not forget there is a fundamental positioning of data management as a profession, and those fundamentals we can't forget. So I think it is adopting new, but carrying some fundamentals and some foundations from today into that future. Applying what I tell my team, applying the fundamentals of critical thinking, the data integrity. How are we going to be able to, in this world of enormous amount of data, how are we going to be able to find that needle in this big haystack as we look and review our data? All of this with a goal, unambiguously demonstrating credibility and reliability of the clinical trial data, which brings these treatments into the patient's hands. So that, I think I would say, if I were to reflect on a few of those trends, Kathy.
And it was interesting that Chris Lintott, who you referred to, the keynote speaker, he called himself a machine learning optimist, because he was saying that, you know, you absolutely, the machines can do so much, but you absolutely have to have the human there at the center of it to interpret and to really see whether the anomalies matter. And you know, the machine can see the anomalies, but the human can see how relevant they are.
Totally, Kathy. I think the machines can spot those anomalies, but they won't necessarily know which anomalies really matter. They would over a period of time as the more and more you train them. And I think that's where the humans come into place. And if you were to tie that with our theme of risk-based quality management, what data matters, how do we predict and mitigate those risks in those data? Absolutely critical, absolutely key.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for now, Sanjay. Just if anybody has any questions, please do send them, and say specifically which of our speakers you would like to address those questions, if you would. Sanjay mentioned the regulatory landscape, so we're going to talk a little bit more about that now with Jonathan Andrus, who is the Chief Strategy Officer of Clinical Inc. And you moderated the regulatory panel at SCDM, Jonathan. And so, which is always a popular one. There's people really, really need to know a lot about this. So
it's all me, Kathy. They all come.
Of course, we know you've got your fan club out there. We will be actually sending out signed photographs at the end of this.
Excellent. Yes. 8 by 10 glossies, yes, signed.
But you know, before we talk about the regulatory environment, I mean, you at the event itself, but let's talk some more now about the way that clinical trials are evolving so quickly, and get a sense of what is actually changing. So if you could just talk us through that first of all.
Absolutely. I mean, Sanjay touched on that a bit, and I think even Carol talked about that even with some of the other sessions that were going on at the annual conference last year. But I think even in the time since the annual conference occurred, so much has happened even in that time too, where at least anecdotally and personally, and in the work that I do, as well as even in within my roles within the society, and hearing from even folks that are on this panel today and what they're doing within their own companies. I think the biggest thing that's happening is it's all about flexibility, right? Giving trial and study design and patients flexibility when it comes to being engaged in the work of delivering new therapies, new needed therapies. So getting to the patient, you know, it's all about the patient, it's all about flexibility. I also think it's really about reaching patients where they are, and also trying to keep them where they are without having to interrupt their day-to-day lifestyle, their day-to-day activities that they're doing. So I think that that's what I'm seeing when I see protocols coming across my desk and seeing innovative study designs for how can we, yes, there could be some assessments and activities that need to be done in clinic and at the site, but where and whenever possible to try and reach those patients where they are. Even, you know, a big push now with direct-to-patient supply, trying to get supplies directly to the patients without them having to come in for meds, you know, and how do you do that effectively and efficiently? So those, you know, I think, as I think about them, Kathy, are really what I've seen just a big uptick in really that one word. It's all about flexibility, really.
So flexibility is a word that probably regulators don't really like very much. I mean, they've got to sort of adapt, and they've got to adapt, you know, alongside some very swift movements that have been happening within the industry and within trial development. So tell us how it's impacted the regulatory environment, and you know, where you think that's going to go, whether it's going to, whether they are becoming new creatures and becoming more flexible.
Well, maybe I should have added a word in front of flexible, and controlled flexibility, right? and I mean that in all seriousness, right? Having a clear plan about what you're doing with your study, how you're going to achieve that, what are the measures you're going to take to validate the tools, the instruments, the devices, the solutions that you're looking to use. And the regulators are responding to that. I think, you know, in my, dare I say, I don't know, 26, 27 years in industry, I have never before seen, I think, the regulators looking to partner as closely as they have with industry, right? Because things are changing so quickly. They understand that in order to keep for lack of a better word, right, to keep the trains running and to keep clinical trials running, there has to be an approach that's done, especially in the pandemic world that we find ourselves in. But COVID aside, right, I think to me that this was a wake-up call for not only industry, but also for the regulatory bodies globally on, okay, let's start to work together very closely on how we can do this and drive progress forward on doing what's most critical, which is what I said before, reaching patients, driving new therapies, and keeping things going. So I think out of that, what we're seeing from the regulators, even in the time since I last met with them in September, and I'm sure we'll hear more about it coming up at this year's town hall, it's, new guidance is coming out around digital health technologies. FDA just issued one. It's still out for public comment. I certainly encourage all of you who are here today to seek that out and take a look at it, because it has a lot of good information in there that'll help guide you in putting that controlled flexibility into your clinical trials. Throughout the rest of the world, there's been EMA guidances around computer systems and electronic data, guidances around decentralized clinical trials that have come forth. FDA is also about to publish that too. Kathy, sorry, I think you were going to ask me.
No, in fact, that's exactly what I was going to ask you, actually, whether it's the changes are coming about at regulatory level as swiftly in one geographical area as another, because obviously, this is a global industry.
No, correct. And yes, absolutely. I mean, even the Swiss medics have released a DCT guidance. The Danish Medicines Agency, DMA, has released guidances around decentralized clinical trials. MHRA has released guidances around those things. So yes, absolutely, from a global perspective. I think the biggest challenge that a lot of us in industry, as we look to do our clinical trials, is grappling with the regulatory acceptance of doing certain things. And that's why I go back to before around, with thanks to you, Kathy, for having me add that extra word of controlled flexibility to engaging with the regulators early on in your protocol design, right? Engaging with them and understanding from them, what are their expectations? Here's the approach you want to take. Maybe you want to use, for example, a sensor or a wearable in an upcoming clinical trial because you're studying a particular movement disorder that would benefit from gathering and collecting those extra kinds of data. But then again, in a controlled way, pausing and engaging with the regulators and finding out from them what their expectations are around that. And again, as I said before, I find it now a much more openness and much more partnership, really.
Yeah. And that's very heartening, isn't it? It's great. I mean, obviously the decentralization of trials and more hybrid trials all really linked to COVID in many ways. So it was starting to happen, but it's been accelerated. But I mean, COVID itself had other impacts, one assumes, on the way that clinical trials were operating. What sort of thing would you suggest? What would you tell us that was happening?
No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think obviously COVID had a major impact on recruitment and of course, those patients that were already recruited into studies, retaining them too, right? Making them feel comfortable that it's okay to come into clinic. Again, from a personal perspective, we had a number of studies where a lot of our customers had to pivot and actually take a lot of their assessments and other types of data collection needs in a more virtual, remote kind of way because they wanted to keep those patients engaged. Because there was, especially during the first, few months, and of course we continue to see different spikes and variants that appear and ebbs and flows with regard to that. And I think because of COVID, right, to your point, Kathy, it really has lit the rocket, if you will, I think, behind putting together those types of controlled flexibility options within studies. But the other thing too is obviously supply chain has been severely hampered as well. So getting devices and tools and technologies and other things shipped out and sent either to patients, to sites, wherever, and also getting access to those different types of pieces of hardware and tools has been challenging, right? And not only in the clinical trial space, but across the globe. I mean, from chipboards in your car and not being able to get access to buy a new vehicle, to you name it. And of course, that has had a ripple effect as well on the supply chain within clinical trials related to COVID.
Yeah, it's good that you feel sorry for the car industry at the same time as your own industry.
It's only the pain from purchasing vehicles and
Yeah, exactly. I had exactly the same problem.
how much the price has gone up. Incredible.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Jonathan. So, I mean, I can see there's already a question coming in for you for later on, but
Okay.
let's move on now to.
Great to talk with you, Kathy. Thanks.
Great to talk to you, and let's talk to Ward now, because I mean, COVID has already just completely peppered every bit of our conversation so far. And obviously clinical data was just so key to the fast development of vaccines. And we had a session in September, which is called the Jab of Hope. Really interesting discussion between some of the main players in the development of COVID vaccines. So we had panelists from AstraZeneca, from Pfizer, and we had Ward Lemaire from Janssen J&J. So Ward, good to see you. I can't imagine what the pressure must have been like developing vaccines with the world waiting and watching. Incredible pressure. So how were you able to run studies and to be sure that you could actually have the sort of quality that you needed, but achieve the speed that was necessary?
Yeah, thank you. And first, thank you for inviting me back on this exciting best of webinar follow-up session. Like we highlighted in September, this was definitely the most accelerated, pressured, and visible program in our Janssen history. But the pressure was matched with getting the highest priority in our pharma portfolio very early on. That came then with fast decision making, very strong project management support that we got, accelerating really every step on the critical path. And obviously, it was the close collaboration and prioritization within functions, within regions, but definitely also the regulatory agencies did help there too. On the question on quality, it was really very clear also from the beginning, because of the attention that was out there, that was absolutely essential, that could never be compromised. So we never skipped steps. We just did more in parallel, more at-risk spending, more resourcing that we threw on it to prioritize also every step of the way over any other milestone in our portfolio. So that's how we were able to really accelerate a lot of the timelines.
And it's interesting when you say you didn't skip any steps, because I think that this was a problem with the public perception sometimes, wasn't it? There were sort of people were worried that the speed meant that some steps had been skipped. And it was very clear when you actually read a proper account of how it went about that didn't happen. But I mean, and what about the collaboration that went on? I mean, in your career, have you ever seen that sort of collaboration? And you mentioned the regulators, but I guess you were also talking to your colleagues in other companies, because really the clinical data is the key and a key part of the puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely. Collaboration was at every level, and it was absolutely essential in the success of this vaccine deliverable that we had, and all companies actually that were part of the Jab of Hope session highlighted that the accelerated project plan for the key deliverables, like the EUA submission, were really literally worked out hour by hour ahead of the deliverable, but by leveraging the global time zones to our advantage rather than saying it's a problem. So there was optimized cross-functional collaboration, so that to make sure that there are clear handovers between data management and operations, with a lot of open, real, and transparent communication where each felt that they could actually pressure test each other. The excellent partnership we also had with our CRO partners, but on top of that, also the vendors that we're working with, whether it's central labs or any other vendor, everyone understood that this was something that had absolute priority. We followed what we call the follow the sun approach, where handovers happened from Asia hub to the European hub to the North American hub, back to the Asia hub, so that the cross-regional collaboration could get us working 24/5 or 24/6, even if you start early. And that was a collaboration that I have never seen before in my career. So that helped. as well.
Sorry to interrupt. I mean, what about the teams of people as well? I mean, were they different from the sort of teams that you would normally be using?
Well, very early on, when we knew that this was going to be a top priority, we did have a clear message and ask on our staff, and we started to look at which teams could work together. We also understood that it would have a big impact on our staff, and so they needed to be up to the task. We knew already it was going to be disruptive on their private life. There was going to be a need for flexibility. So absolutely, there was a team building exercise very early on as well, cross-functional, because that's how the collaboration was needed. We knew that was needed because things will always go wrong, or not per plan, not go wrong, but not per plan. And so it's the connection, it's the communication, it's the understanding of one another that actually makes those things happen faster and without even more pressure than everyone felt already. The last thing, and I think it's a very important one that you also brought up, there was a really absolutely great cross-company collaboration at the same time. We all knew, and so the parties that were involved in Jab of Hope, AstraZeneca and Pfizer and ourselves, we all knew that we were in a race. But it was very clear from the onset that the race was against the virus and trying to end the pandemic, which was a bigger race or more important race than the competing against one another. And so very early on, we set up meetings, we had email conversations with multiple pharma companies to discuss EUA requirements, to discuss how we did things, and that has been a collaborative effort that I have also not seen that much before. And I hope that's something that we can carry forward past this pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you were all part of making history, weren't you? Something the world's never seen before. And you must have learned so much. So now the big question is sort of what stays with you from your learnings, because you're working at a different speed, you're working in different ways, and what really you would say, actually, we did it, but it wouldn't work again. Let's hope you never have to do it at this sort of speed, but if you had to, what didn't work?
Yeah, great learnings there as well. Obviously, what this program has shown is how we can, through early bringing data early and more frequently for quick decision-making at every level, by the way, within the company, but also with regulatory bodies, how that can actually speed up if there is an absolute critical need for a global health crisis like we had. And we can work, as I said earlier, we can work more cross-regionally as a global industry. We can work better cross-functionally without finger pointing, whatever. So that is something that was essential. And by having that global footprint, it actually allows, and the flexibility that we cannot forget, indeed, in the middle of all that, people working from home, how we went through the last two years or so without really burning out people is something we really have to get home and make sure that we do that across the board. When we think about what we should avoid, in the industry is, of course, assuming that the timelines we just now hit can be achieved on all programs. There is an at-risk spending, there is a prioritization that actually had an effect on the rest of the portfolio that we cannot forget. And so some of the attention we got from regulatory agencies, as I said earlier, also that is not always common. We did things that are not normally addressed immediately with a response from regulatory agencies either. So it's not every day, however, that one can work on a project like this one, which obviously has had a potential impact on everyone on our globe. And so that drove some of the timelines and the pressure that was there. But we cannot forget the human aspect. Of course, we talk about AI, machine learning, and all of the innovation that's going on. It's always through people. And so that is something we have to be careful with, that we constantly keep in mind the people behind that make that all happen. So that was what the Jab of Hope was all about. I think it's the people and the celebration of what they contribute.
Absolutely. Well, many congratulations. Thank you very much indeed for that. And the people element takes me very nicely onto the next thing I want to talk about back with Carol. because the human angle was actually covered, wasn't it, Carol, in these soft skills sessions. You examined, you said, how your personal brand is about self-definition, transparency, and authenticity. So tell us some more about that.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. There are several sessions about personal brandy, and it was really talking about leveraging your brand and as you said, being authentic in it and really transparent, letting people know who you really are, defining yourself. So in this age of working remotely, not necessarily being able to be in person, having your LinkedIn profile really reflect who you are and what you're looking for was something that some of the sessions had discussed. And one story in particular really struck me. There was a presenter who was hearing impaired, and she needed to be transparent about being hearing impaired. So she said one of the challenges that she faced in working remotely was that when people don't have their cameras on, she can't read lips. And so she needed to be very transparent in her presenting herself to her teams and very honest in asking them to do that. Additionally, if she presents at conferences, she asks if there is the ability to have captioning so that she can read the caption. So things like this, that struck me as being, very unique, certainly to her situation, but something that I don't think we were thinking about in the forefront of our minds, because we were all working in an office and working together, and now that we're apart. So that was an example, but really a lot of it was centered around being true to what you're truly looking for and working on the skills necessary to get the positions or be in the jobs that truly make you happy and fulfill you. There were sessions that covered the evolution of the CDM to the clinical data scientist. And Sanjay had alluded to, the reflection papers and, that transition. And there's a whole set of papers about that. And there were sessions talking about what were the skills needed for that transition. Do you need to develop your critical thinking? Are you focusing enough on artificial intelligence and machine learning? Risk-based monitoring for data cleaning. I think that there are all of these skills that some of them hard, some of them soft, but all necessary for this evolution that we're going through. It's coming. It's not, we're thinking about it. We're here. We're right in the middle of it. So these sessions really helped parse out a lot of these skills and talk through them.
And that element about the shift to clinical data science, I want to ask you all about in a moment. But Carol, thank you very much for now. Let's go to some questions. If anyone has any more questions from the audience, please do send them because we would like to hear from you. There's a question here for Jonathan from Dr. Rohit Kumar Singh, and he says most of the things go hand in hand for DM and RBQM. Risk-based monitoring has evolved from DM somewhere. How do you see DM and RBQM are different? Jonathan.
Yeah, I think they're more alike than they are different. I think the role of the data manager is critical in the overall deployment of a risk-based quality management plan within our organizations. From the very beginnings of collecting data in a risk-based orientated way, all the way through to as you're doing your monitoring activities, there are solutions and tools that data managers can bring to bear to help with that risk-based approach to providing quality oversight on that clinical trial data. So very much a part of that risk assessment categorization that companies do, and the data manager working very much hand in hand with the clinical monitoring team to help carry that out, I think is very much supportive for sure. And I'm sure other folks on this panel within their own organizations can probably speak more eloquently to how those things go together. But
would anyone else like to come in on this? Please just raise your hand if you do.
Kathy,
yeah.
you very, very briefly, Jonathan touched upon the key ways where they are linked. I think where the risk-based quality management traditionally started from risk-based approaches to monitoring, right? Site monitoring. But the concept underneath is the concept of quality by design. A risk, not one size fit all, right? So as you build your clinical trials, as you apply error checks to those forms, you want to ensure that there are these fit for purpose risk-based approaches in terms of where you're spending your effort, where you're spending your time. So they are very much related. But and I would say, I think in my company and many other companies, the way this concept is applied is a coming together of multiple different functions. Like safety would apply or look at the data with a certain lens. Data management would look at the same data in a different lens, and our monitoring organization would look at the same data but with a different purpose. How do you put all of these pieces together in a centralized way so that you are at least looking the same data, right? That you're not looking multiple different parts of the data. So I think they're pretty much linked, but they're different also in terms of the lenses people are applying. So the data management lens is the data management lens. It's not the safety lens, but the underneath approaches around risk-based, quality by design, or what the ICH E6 R2 or R3 revision is asking is identifying earlier risk, proactively identifying risk, putting a response to those risks that is proportionate to the risk that they pose to your conduct of the study, and being more efficient at the bottom line.
Yeah, okay. I don't know if you wanted to come in, Ward. No pressure here.
No, I can, but I think most was said. I think what I indeed fully agree with Sanjay and Jonathan is having one platform where multiple people with a different lens can go into is absolutely essential. The setup is critical, and that's where the two different functions work closely together. Once you see a signal, whether that's through edit checks of machine learning or artificial intelligence, the action might be different, where the risk-based monitoring might be looking at training at a site or a country specific, might be preventing what is happening at the site, where data management is trying to make sure it doesn't, that we capture all those issues early on. So the action is different, but the signal should be in the same platform, absolutely. And so close collaboration between risk-based monitoring and risk-based data review is absolutely something we have to look into.
Right. There's a question here for Carol. The FDA, this is from Ami Mer. The FDA has just released some guidance on leveraging patient perspectives in clinical trials for devices. How can we take our COVID learnings to accelerate this? Carol.
Yes, so I think that some of the learnings that Ward had covered really could help accelerate this. We have it was the COVID trials were in essence a lot of decentralized work, and so taking that remote working using bring your own device type technology allowed savings of time. Patients didn't have to go to a site to use a device that the site provides. It's a direct connection to either a vendor or to the sponsor itself. So there are time savings there. It can all go into a central database and can be analyzed very quickly. So I think speed, in getting patient information through devices that either it's a bring your own or ship to the patient in their home to get real-time information, something that we absolutely leveraged during the COVID trials and can be leveraged throughout other clinical trials and other indications and therapeutic areas. I don't know if any of my panelists want to add to that or speak to that as well.
Jonathan.
I think the only thing I would add is again, it's all a part of that engaging and evaluating the different devices and tools that you want to use in your study and making sure that it's appropriate for the patient demographic that you're going to be working with. For example, if you're working in Alzheimer's disease research, equipping patients with certain devices to wear or something could be very cognitively frustrating for them, or other kinds of things. So really bringing in the patient perspective, I think, into that is really what FDA is really focused on throughout those guidance documents, as well as even in the more recent DHT draft guidance too. It talks about there and ensuring that the device or the tool is fit for purpose and is appropriate for that patient population in terms of age, cognitive abilities, I mean, you name it, across the board. Ward.
Yeah, the one thing I want to add is what we have also learned through COVID, but actually beyond that, the more we go more in decentralized trials and we capture through device, the more we can actually include patient populations that are more diverse to drive equity and inclusion of healthcare across the globe. Not everyone lives right next to or close enough to a big center to contribute to clinical trials. And so with this, what this has opened up is to have real deep and real conversations about how can we bring more diverse groups in our clinical trials to represent them once we get approval. And again, COVID was a nice example where sometimes we see some clear signals that it's not equitable yet. And so that is where decentralized trials actually can help an enormous step forward to represent everyone, no matter where they are or what ethnicity group they have, which country they're in. Decentralized trials will help with that for sure.
I can see it from sort of the putting the patient at the center, very important. But what about the consistency and the quality of the data, though, when you're talking about decentralizing? And do we need to worry? Is that something we should be worried about? And also, do you need sort of different tools and different capabilities to be dealing, to support this shift, if you like, to more hybrid or decentralized trials? Ward, do you want to carry on? I mean,
Yeah, that's a challenge, right? Because the more we are going to use electronic health records, electronic medical records, real world data, the more that it's not as controlled as the data capture that we're used to for the last decade or so. So how we're going to use humans, analysts, what we talk about, clinical data scientists, to actually make sure that what we have is accurate, the integrity is there, and it's complete enough to actually be making some critical decisions and go to regulatory agencies with full insurance that we're standing behind the data that is there. That is a challenge, but it's something we have to work on together as an industry, together with the regulatory bodies. And so, yeah, I'm excited about that because it gives us so much more data that is available rather than wait for recruitment of 300, 400, 500 patients. I think it can accelerate healthcare in general.
Jonathan, your hand is up.
It is. I was just going to kind of go back to the whole comments that Sanjay and Ward were talking about, which is that lens, right? So all these data coming in from various sources, it's having the abilities to empower the data scientist, the data manager, in conjunction with the clinical teams, to apply that focused lens on those different types of data, looking for trends and outliers, and what are those data telling you? To Ward's point, right, there's lots of different data coming in from lots of different sources, but I believe that we have the tool set, we have the abilities, even going back to the question that was raised around the kind of the collaboration from a risk-based quality management perspective of focusing in on the data that we're collecting that is most critical to the primary primary efficacy and primary safety of that study, and making sure our lens is quite in focus on those data elements that are coming in.
Yeah, can we go back to, we talked a little bit earlier about the shift to clinical data science, and I just want to ask you, from the perspective of your own companies, or your work, Jonathan, perhaps more generally, but really, what's happened in terms of evolving towards clinical data science, and how do you see that changing in the next year? I mean, is it something that has really now got a momentum, or is it still something that needs to be pushed more? Where shall I start? Carol?
It's funny you said that. I just had a meeting the other day about the core competencies. What would the core competencies of a clinical data scientist be? And if we're looking forward, what is it that we want? If we're calling somebody a clinical data scientist, what is it that we want to see in them? It's still a work in progress, but I will tell you that currently in my company, we're there, where we are in the midst of that transition of ensuring that our clinical data scientists are really demonstrating those core competencies. And if they're not, us supporting them as a management team to upskill them to that point. So I think we're there. It's not coming. It's not on the horizon. Now it's a matter of identifying what are the skills necessary to call yourself a clinical data scientist, and how do we as an industry support each other to upskill to get to that point and to raise that level of skill set to really demonstrate ourselves as clinical data scientists. So I think we're there.
But when you say raise the skill set, I mean, where do you see the skill set needed to be most raised?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. Not everybody is a good at the AI/ML. AI/ML is although been around for a while, is starting to come into more mainstream data management type work. So how do you know how to work in that? How do you know how to navigate in that world? I believe that we've talked about the whole risk-based quality management and identifying what data really matters. It's not a matter of 20 years ago of just going through discrepancy after discrepancy and not really thinking about it. It's assessing what's in front of you and saying, does this information matter? So it's that critical thinking, those critical thinking skills. So I'm not saying that there are huge gaps in that, but these are the things that I think normally in past decades we weren't really looking for, but now we're looking for this. We're looking for this ability to be technologically aware, be critical thinkers, be good project managers, et cetera. I mean, there are a number of different skill sets that we want to make sure that a good clinical data scientist has.
So Pfizer's on top of it. What about AbbVie then, Sanjay?
Well, it's a similar sort of journey, Kathy, for us as well. We are taking a look at taking a stock at what capabilities and competencies we have within our organization, where we want to be in terms of playing in this role of a clinical data scientist. We are not calling ourselves clinical data scientists as a title per se, because to me, I think it's what clinical data scientist role does is essentially looking at data with a critical thinking, applying risk-based practices and policies, and telling a story about data, having a very deep understanding of the protocol. So if you look at these 4 or 5 elements as where your organization needs to be able to play in a clinical data scientist role, I think that assessment is ongoing. We are also upskilling our organization, whether it's giving them more data analytics sort of trainings and tools for them to explore data, because that's also one thing I think as data managers we learn by doing versus taking a training. So that's another piece that we are after here at AbbVie.
And thank you very much. And so what about J&J, Janssen Ward?
Yeah, so it's the same. I agree. I think we are there, but where we have not yet arrived is what I would conclude. I think there's so much more that is out there that we have to learn, that we have to grow within. I'm not too hung up on the title myself, whether it's clinical data manager, clinical data scientist, but it's a skill set to what both Carol and Sanjay said, a deep understanding of the science, of the protocol, to understand what we try to get from the data and make sense of it and build a story on that. That is a journey that we all have been on, and I think that's where we are there. We have a lot more strong analytics out there right now, also in J&J, but we are also investing heavily because we don't think we're there yet. And so we need to evolve constantly to give our people better tools to become that scientist, to become that person who can say this data needs to be looked in deeper, and this is noise, and we can forget about that.
So, Jonathan, there's also a question here that you might just want to have a look at, that COVID has impacted the research industry. Do you think COVID-related questions should set a standard in data collection in most non-device studies?
I mean, I think we've all kind of said that, right? I mean, I think COVID, as I said before, has really lit the rocket behind everything that we're doing to put patients first. And if that's what that meant, then, absolutely, let's embrace it. Let's continue to press forward, even related to the questions you were just asking, Ward and Sanjay and Carol, about the way that they're evolving their organizations and upskilling and looking at ways to look at data more critically and more specifically. I think that COVID has really have brought that to the forefront because of the nature of the kinds of data that we're collecting and the ways in which we're collecting it now. So yes, I think. Just
very quickly, Jonathan, what about the actual phrase clinical data science? Two of our three weren't calling it that as such. Is the name irrelevant?
I wouldn't say it's irrelevant, but I think I like Ward. I think he said I don't get too hung up on that particular name, whether it's data science or data management. At the end of the day, it's about, I think, applying effective measures and best practices to quality collection of clinical trial data. So whether or not you give the moniker of data science or data management, at the end of the day, it's more about the content of what that role is doing.
Great. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for the questions.
Sure.
Carol, I just want to look ahead now. I was going to say next year's, but it's actually this year.
This year, yes.
Confusion. You are designing this year's conference, which is going to be where?
It is going to be in San Antonio, Texas, United States. Woo!
And what about the theme now?
Going bigger.
Yes, exactly. I mean, how are real people?
Deep in the heart of Texas. So yeah, we are having a theme of reconnecting. So this theme is really twofold. It's about reconnecting with each other, absolutely, being in person finally. And it's also about making the connection between our themes. They're not individual silos, they are connected. I think we've heard that today. How does one impact the other? How does one influence the other? So you're going to be seeing a lot of that, a lot of the connections between the different themes and different presentations.
And what about any specific objectives or tracks, or what will we do?
Yeah, I mean the tracks are very similar to last year, but we've taken them up a notch a little bit. It's really AI ML. Can it live up to the promise? We heard about it last year. What are we really looking at? Why regulators and realities collide? Do they really collide, or are they working in partnership? And I think they are, and I think we're going to see a lot of that. CDMs are humans, and why the personal brand is really more important than ever. We have a post-COVID RBQM, DCT, and our very popular wild card, where we have a lot of innovation. And then technology, data, and communications. Once again, this year we had the most submissions in that category. So I think we're going to see a lot of really good, innovative things in there. So I'm very excited. Please come, everybody. We're going to have a really great time, and it's going to be an incredible, incredible session and conference.
CDMs are humans, and that will be proof because they will be there in real people,
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much indeed to all of our panelists today. Thank you, most of all, thank you for watching. We have got a survey that we would like you to fill out before you leave the webinar, if you would. Just an evaluation of this webinar, just to give your thoughts on it. Jonathan will be sending his signed photographs to everybody should they want them. Don't forget that next Thursday we have another webinar, the State of Industry webinar that a year ago it was Sanjay delivering it, but not this time, but we will be, that will be next Thursday at the same time as this. So I hope you can join us for that. So for today, from all of us here, until next week, goodbye.